he was given a soul as a cruel joke, a debt paid in flesh under a sky the color of rust and regret. Her name, they told him, was the China girl, a piece of property bartered for over a whiskey-stained table in a town called Providence that had long forgotten the meaning of the word. Elias watched her from the porch of his desolate ranch, a silhouette of suffering against the biting expanse of the plains. She was small, bound not by ropes but by an exhaustion so profound it seemed to anchor her to the dust. The man who delivered her, Silas, had a laugh like stones grinding together. A wife of the widower, he'd sneered, his words a greasy sermon on the virtues of pragmatism. Keeps the bed warm. Quieter than the last one, I reckoned the mention of Sarah, his late wife, was a deliberate needle pushed into the rawest part of Elias's grief. He did not rise to the bait. His face, weathered into a mask of stoicism by sun and sorrow, betrayed nothing. He simply watched Silas ride away, leaving the woman standing beside a single, pathetic carpet bag. Elias was a man of few words, his heart a locked room since Sarah had been taken by the fever 2 years prior. The silence she left behind was a physical presence, a weight that had settled over the ranch, suffocating the laughter of his 2 small children, Caleb and Leah, and withering the roses she had so lovingly planted. Now, this new silence, this new woman, stood before him. He was a good man, a principled man, and the thought of accepting this human currency turned his stomach. But the thought of leaving her to the mercies of the prairie, or worse, to a man like Silas, was an even greater sin. He descended the steps, his boots stirring small puffs of ochre earth. He stopped a few feet from her. She did not look up. Her gaze was fixed on the splintered wood of his porch, as if it were the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved beneath her feet. He was a large man, made larger by the solitude he wrapped around himself like a cloak. Inside the house, 2 small faces, miniature copies of his own guarded expression, watched from the grimy window. His children. Another reason he could not turn her away. He cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the still air. He pointed not to his own door, but to the small room off the side of the main house, the one that had been for a hired hand long ago. There, he said. It was not an invitation. It was a statement of fact, a boundary drawn. Then he turned and walked back inside, the slam of the screen door the only conversation he could offer. The first week was an exercise in mutual haunting. Mai, as she would later be called, moved through the edges of his world like a phantom. She occupied the small, Spartan room he had indicated, a space with little more than a cot and a crate for a table. She never entered the main house unless he was gone, working the far fences. Then, she would slip in, a wraith of efficiency, cleaning the layers of dust that had consecrated his grief, washing the children's clothes and leaving them folded, a silent, anonymous offering. Elias would return to find the scent of lye soap where there had been only stale sorrow, a hint of order in the chaos of his neglect. He and the children ate their meals in tense silence at the main table. He would leave a plate for her on the porch railing, and it would be gone by morning, the plate washed and returned to the same spot. They were ghosts in the same house, orbiting a core of shared loneliness they never acknowledged. The children, Caleb and Leah, were her silent observers. They watched her from behind the barn, their wide, serious eyes tracking her every move. She never approached them, never offered a smile or a word. She respected their fear, the fierce loyalty they held for the memory of their mother. She understood walls. Her own were built of something far stronger than wood and stone. One afternoon, Elias watched from the window as she stood before the skeletal remains of Sarah's rose garden. It was a plot of earth defined by thorns and death, a perfect monument to his own withered heart. He had not touched it since Sarah died. He couldn't bear to. But Mai stood there for a long time, her small frame still against the relentless wind. She was not looking at the dead bushes, but at the soil, her head tilted as if listening to a story only she could hear. He felt a sharp, protective anger. That was Sarah's place. Sacred ground. He expected her to turn away, but she did not. Instead, she knelt, her hands hovering over the cracked, unforgiving dirt. For a moment, he thought she might weep, and the alien notion of it was unsettling. But she did not weep. She simply stayed there, a sentinel at the grave of a stranger's love. The next morning, she began to work. With her bare hands, she started pulling the brittle weeds, her movement slow and deliberate. Elias watched from a distance, his hands tightening on the handle of his axe. Every weed she pulled felt like a violation, a disturbance of a sacred ruin. He told himself he should stop her, tell her to leave it be, that some things were meant to remain broken. But he remained silent, a prisoner of his own inertia. The children watched too, their initial suspicion slowly morphing into a quiet curiosity. They saw what he saw. She was not destroying the memory of the garden, she was performing last rites. She cleared the dead things with a reverence that disarmed his anger, piling them neatly to one side. Then she began to turn the soil, using a sharpened piece of scrap metal she must have found in the barn. The work was arduous, the ground hard as iron. Yet she persisted, day after day, under the merciless sun. She was not just clearing a plot of land, she was excavating hope from a place of absolute despair. It was a language he understood better than words. It was the language of relentless, thankless toil, of pitting oneself against an indifferent earth and wresting from it a reason to continue. He saw the sweat on her brow, the dirt ground deep into the lines of her hands, and for the first time, he saw not a China girl or a problem, but a fellow survivor. One evening, he found one of his work shirts laid carefully on his bed. It was his favorite, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. It had been ripped on a snag of barbed wire. He had meant to throw it out. But she had taken it. The tear was not merely patched, it was mended with a fine, intricate stitch work he had never seen before. In the center of the patch, woven with thread she must have unraveled from her own meager belongings, was a small, delicate embroidery of a mountain blossom. It was exquisitely beautiful, a tiny, defiant act of creation on a canvas of decay. He ran his calloused thumb over the threads. It was a message. I am more than a beast of burden. I have skill. I have a name. I have a past. He wore the shirt the next day, and though he did not acknowledge her work, he felt her gaze on the mended cloth, a fleeting, almost imperceptible connection. The soil began to soften under her care. The earth, long barren, started to breathe again. Elias found himself altering his path back to the house each day, just to pass by the garden, to see the slow, miraculous transformation. He told himself it was foolish, that nothing would grow there again. But a part of him, a part he thought long dead, felt a flicker of anticipation. He began leaving a bucket of fresh well water near the plot each morning before he rode out. He never saw her use it, but the water was gone each evening, the soil dark and damp. It was a silent conversation, a shared stewardship of this small, hopeful square of earth. The children were the first to cross the invisible line. One hot afternoon, as she worked, Leah, his daughter, walked tentatively towards the garden. She stopped a few feet away, clutching something in her small fist. For a long minute, she just stood there, a small, brave soldier. Then, she opened her hand and held out a rusty, forgotten trowel, one of Sarah's old tools she must have unearthed. She did not speak, simply offered it. Mai stopped her work and looked at the child, then at the tool. She slowly wiped her hands on her trousers and took the trowel, her fingers brushing Leah's for a fleeting second. It was the first time they had touched. Caleb, ever his father's shadow, emerged from behind the water trough, holding a handful of dried seeds he'd found in a shed. He, too, offered them to her. She accepted them with a solemn nod, a flicker of something soft and vulnerable in her eyes. That evening, the air in the house felt different. The silence was less oppressive, less heavy. Elias served the stew, the familiar quiet ritual. But this time, it was broken. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it filled the entire room, low and clear, without a trace of the servitude he had expected. "My name," she said, looking directly at him for the first time, her gaze steady and unbroken, "is Mai." He froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. The word hung in the air, a thing of substance and weight. It was not a plea. It was a declaration. A reclamation. In that single moment, she ceased to be the China girl, the ghost, the burden. She became a person, with a name and a will that had survived the inferno. He felt a profound, unnerving shift inside him, as if a foundation stone had been pulled loose. He did not reply, not with words. But the next day, as he passed her in the yard, he gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod and said, the name felt foreign and strange on his tongue, but it also felt right. It felt like the beginning of an amends. Life on the ranch found a new rhythm, a quiet harmony orchestrated by unspoken agreements. Mai began to eat with them at the table, no longer a shadow waiting for leftovers. She sat opposite him, a still and dignified presence. The children no longer hid from her. They would follow her to the garden, watching her coax life from the soil. She had found a small packet of vegetable seeds in her carpet bag, and tiny green shoots were now pushing their way towards the sun. For the first time in 2 years, something new was growing at the ranch. She brought an order and a strange peace to the house. The scent of baking bread sometimes replaced the smell of dust. The children's clothes were always mended, the floors always swept. She asked for nothing, demanded nothing, but her very existence was beginning to repair the broken pieces of their lives. Elias found himself watching her, studying the graceful efficiency of her movements, the unyielding strength in her slight frame. He saw the deep sorrow that lived behind her eyes, a sorrow that mirrored his own, and he felt a kinship that transcended language and culture. She was not a replacement for Sarah. Sarah was a memory of laughter and sunlight. Mai was a testament to survival, a quiet promise that a heart could continue to beat even after it was shattered. He began to see that his home was not just a monument to his grief, it could be a sanctuary for hers, too. He started leaving extra supplies for her without comment, a ball of good thread, a bar of scented soap, a worn but warm blanket for her cot. They were small gestures, quiet admissions of her place in their world. He was building a home around her, not of wood and nail, but of respect and protection. He was beginning to understand that Silas's cruel joke had, in a way, been a form of providence after all. It had brought a healer to a house that was dying. The sky began to curdle one Tuesday afternoon, the brilliant blue bruised with shades of purple and grey. A storm was coming. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an unspoken menace. It was on this afternoon that Elias saw the rider on the horizon. He knew before the figure was close enough to recognize. It was Silas. He came not as a tradesman this time, but as a collector. Elias stood on the porch, his body a rigid line of defiance. He sent the children inside with a sharp, low command. Mai came to the doorway behind him, the trowel still in her hand. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fearless. Silas reined in his horse, his gaze sweeping over the ranch with an owner's arrogance. He noted the tended garden, the clean porch, the woman standing behind Elias. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face. "Well, look at you, Elias," he drawled, swinging down from his horse. "Looks like you've put my property to good use." Polished her up right nice, he took a step towards the porch, his eyes fixed on Mai. "Time to collect my investment. Got a buyer in Carson City willing to pay a premium for one so." Domesticated, the word property struck Elias like a physical blow. A cold, clarifying rage, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, surged through him. It burned away the fog of his grief, leaving behind a terrible, simple clarity. This was his home. These were his people. "She's not for sale," Elias said, his voice a low growl. Silas laughed, a short, ugly sound. "She was never yours to keep, widower. Just a loan." Now, step aside, he moved to push past Elias, his hand reaching for Mai. What happened next was not a thought, but an instinct. The protector, dormant for so long, awoke with savage force. Elias's hand shot out, grabbing Silas's wrist in a grip of iron. The rancher, the grieving husband, fell away, and for a moment, the soldier he had once been stood in his place. The fight was short, brutal, and decisive. It was not a brawl, it was an expulsion. Elias moved with a grim efficiency, every action fueled by 2 years of pent-up sorrow and a new, fierce need to defend. The storm on the horizon broke, the first fat drops of rain splattering in the dust as Silas scrambled back onto his horse, a line of blood trickling from his split lip. Elias stood over him, his chest heaving. "This is her home," he roared, the words torn from him by the wind and the rain. "You are not welcome here. Not now. Not ever." Silas stared, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a raw, animal fear. He saw not a broken widower, but a man who had found something to live for, and therefore, something to kill for. Without another word, he yanked his horse's reins and fled, swallowed by the sheets of rain. The storm raged all night, washing the world clean. Elias stood on the porch, letting the rain soak his shirt, the cold water a balm on his bruised knuckles and his simmering soul. The violence had not felt good, but it had felt necessary. It had been an affirmation, a drawing of a line in the earth, not with a plow, but with his own 2 hands. When he finally came inside, drenched and weary, he found my waiting in the main room. A single lamp cast a warm, golden glow. The children were asleep, tucked into their beds. On the table, she had laid out a bowl of hot water, a clean cloth, and a small tin of salve. She did not speak. She simply gestured to the chair. He sat, and she began to clean the cuts on his hands, her touch gentle but firm. Her fingers, usually caked with the soil of the garden, were now tending to his wounds. In the quiet intimacy of the lamplight, he looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the scars she carried, not on her skin, but in the profound stillness of her spirit. They were both survivors, marked by the world, finding refuge in the shelter they had built for each other. He had given her a room, and she had given him back his life. She finished her work, her gaze meeting his. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, only a deep, abiding gratitude and a strength that mirrored his own. In that moment, he understood that a family was not something you were born into. Sometimes, it was something you fought for, something you earned, something you built from the broken pieces of 2 separate lives. He had lost a wife, but he had found a partner. The children had lost a mother, but they had found a guardian. "Thank you," he whispered, the words raw and unfamiliar. She simply nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips for the very first time. It was a fragile, beautiful thing, like the first blossom in the spring. The next morning, the world was reborn. The sun rose into a sky scrubbed clean and brilliant, its light catching the raindrops that clung to every surface, making the ranch glitter as if it were strewn with diamonds. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Elias walked out to the garden. The storm had not harmed it, it had nourished it. The small green shoot stood taller, stronger, reaching for the light. Caleb and Leah were already there, crouched beside Mai, pointing at a tiny ladybug making its way up a leaf. They were not silent and watchful anymore. They were engaged, their faces alive with a simple, childish wonder that he thought had been lost forever. Leah looked up and saw him, and she smiled a real, unguarded smile. He felt his heart, that tight, knotted thing in his chest, loosen. Mai rose and walked towards him. She stopped and looked at the house, at the children, at the thriving garden, and then at him. Her eyes conveyed everything words could not. This was home. This was safety. This was peace. Elias looked at the small family before him, the resilient woman who had taught him how to live again, the children whose laughter was slowly returning, the patch of earth that was a testament to their shared will to survive. Silas had meant for her to be a symbol of his ruin, a cruel joke to mock his loss. But she had become the architect of his redemption. She had not replaced the love he had lost, she had shown him that his heart was big enough to hold a new one. He had been a man living in a graveyard of his own making, but she had come and planted flowers amongst the tombstones. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently rested it on her shoulder. It was a gesture of solidarity, of partnership, of profound, unspoken love. They stood together, watching their children, the quiet cowboy and the woman named Mai, 2 solitary souls who had found their home not on a map, but in each other. The story of Elias and Mai is a testament to the quiet power of human decency and the